So this PowerPoint is all about research. And like I said, I'm going to go over this pretty quickly just because I think, obviously, as a student from Pitt, you are a quality student. You have had multiple classes that have talked about research before. So this is more of just a review, a refresher. And I'm going to be talking about research within the confines of the memo assignment, the career report assignment, and the proposal, all of which are upcoming assignments. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So when we typically think about the research process, especially in college, we've got read, write, rinse, repeat. Little guy's got his coffee there. Very important part of the writing process. When we're talking about the actual research process, a lot of it is just finding the materials that we need, retrieving them, and then evaluating them. Are they quality materials? Everything that we find, it isn't always appropriate to include in our paper. So the first kind of question we have to ask ourselves is, when do we find sources credible? And of course, if we were in class together right now, I would ask you that. Like when you're trying to gather materials for your memo, say that you want to write a memo about the engineering test and whether or not they should be licensed. What journals are you going to use? Or say that you wanted to do a memo about proper hand washing techniques. Maybe you'd go to a journal that had everything to do with health. So obviously, if we trust the source, this even comes down to a person. Like whenever I was trying to get information about my daughter's dental health, like I had a student from the University of Pitt's dental hygiene program. I asked her, I was like, what kind of toothbrush is the best toothbrush to have for my daughter? Like I trusted her. I trusted what she had to say. I knew she had far more information than I do about it. The subject is deemed reliable by others that we trust. When the subject is an expert, so someone's a PhD, maybe they have their own consulting firm. Timeliness. How updated? I mean, there are some fields that, especially the medical field, science, things change. We used to, bloodletting used to be something that was acceptable as a way to kind of make people heal and get better. Obviously, that's not something that we would do today. There's all kinds of old wives' tales, things that we used to believe that we don't believe anymore. And that's how we kind of decide if a source is okay or not. Well, how old is it? I've even had students say before, well, that article is a little dated. I don't know what I think about it. Attractiveness of the source. Here's something scary but true. Students that tend to be more attractive tend to get better grades. And that people that tend to be more attractive tend to get hired at a faster rate. So we are a judgmental society, but it's the same thing for sources. Similarity of the source. So we kind of like to see in others what we see in ourselves. And that's the same for references. That's why when you go out and you're in an interview situation, that whole symmetry thing, the whole similarity, the mirror image, looking like them, the way that they look non-verbally. It's the same thing with sources. If we're reading something and it's like, oh yeah, I kind of agree with that. Oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And then finally, liking the source. The example I'll use for this is personal in nature, but it's absolutely true. My sister-in-law does not care for my mother-in-law, and it doesn't matter what she does. She could cure cancer, and she would say that she didn't do it fast enough. Everything that she does is wrong. And so she could even, oh, look at the way she eats crackers. She's so stupid. I hate her. So everything she does is wrong. However, when you like someone, they can do no wrong. So these are all times that we find a source credible. However, not all sources are equal. And so we're looking at them in terms of reliability, accuracy, completeness. So reliability, are they objective? Are they impartial? My father does actually sell cars, or used to sell cars. He is retired now. And I gotta say, I did buy cars from him, and I didn't completely trust him, even though he's my dad, because he had something to gain. So I think whenever you see an ad from United Dairy Farmers and it's all about how good milk is for you, well, yeah, you're gonna tell me good milk's good for me because it's attached to your wallet. Like, you're benefiting in some way. We talked about before in the slide before that the recency, the timeliness of information. I had seen an ad, I think it was like a couple years ago, back when I used to teach PR writing, that there was an article about the benefits of soda. I mean, to believe that that was actually information that went around to the public. It's all about when you get the information for the kind of quality of the scientific data that you're going to obtain, as well as accuracy. That's why within your career report, I ask you to have not only the interview, but secondary sources as well. If you're talking to an accountant and they're telling you, this is a stressful, career, you should be prepared for that stress. You should make sure that you have yoga in your life, or you should make sure that you take plenty of time off. If you look at the secondary sources and they indicate the same thing, okay, we've got some repeat here. Maybe accounting is a stressful job. The example I provide here is the Atkins diet is safe. This has kind of been wildly disputed. Atkins was a big 7-10 years ago. Everybody was saying bread was evil, and then there was a lot of people that saying, hey, listen, the creator of the Atkins diet actually died, and it's not safe to have all these meat and cheeses. And so that's why I always kind of say don't just have one source. You want to have multiple sources that are saying the same thing. That's why you've got researchers and you're looking at their sources and they have like 25, 30, 45 source citations. It's not just because they want to look smart, it's because they're looking for patterns in the data. So redundant and verifiable, and then completeness. And so we're looking at what aspects of these source, what qualities are we getting? So newspapers are recent, but they're low in completeness. So books are high in completeness, but they're not as recent. So that's why you want a variety of sources. I think sometimes we tend to depend a lot on online articles whenever books give us much more depth. So maybe try to get away from that when you think about your career report, especially some variety. How complete are you getting? How deep in information are you getting? For your proposal, which we haven't talked about yet, but I will eventually kind of talk about, and your memo, did you look at some brochures? Did you look at handouts? Did you look at scientific articles? Did you look at journal articles? Trying to make sure you've got a variety of sources, as well as with your career portfolio, did you talk to a variety of professionals? Those interviews and personal contacts are a different kind of source. Everything kind of adds something to your report. All right, so evaluating a source. You can see here in the corner, Your Mommy Kills Animals. This was an actual advertisement that PETA sent out to children. And I'm not trying to bash PETA. Just as a side note, I actually used to be a vegetarian when I was in high school. I was a vegan for a short period of time, so there's absolutely no judgment here. This is merely just sharing information. I think whenever we see PETA, there's some thoughts that come into people's minds in terms of how they go about sending their message out. I think they tend to be a little bit less conservative, a little bit stronger in their messages. This particular ad, based off a PR case study that I looked at a while ago, actually handed these out to school children in so your mommy kills animals, and their argument was that your parents are providing you food that is animals. And I have always been very honest with my daughter about, like, this is turkey, this is what a turkey is, and this is pig. So I try not to be the lady in the picture. But anyway, how would we go about evaluating a source like PETA versus another one? What do they stand to gain? What's their message? What's their background? So what is the author's background? Is the organization reputable? And what is the credibility of the publication? So it's not enough for us to kind of look at a publication and be like, well, it looks legit. I think we have to know where the author studied, and this involves a lot of work on our part, but this also will protect us against misinformation. What's not just the information, but what is the organization's reputation? Again, back to the PETA example. And what's the credibility of the publication? Say that I wanted to give a presentation on how to maintain an effective romantic relationship. I could talk about an article from Cosmo, or I could talk about the Journal of Personal and Social Relationships. So I have a lot of different source options. I would say always go the high road. The sad thing is, the frustrating thing is that we have so many options, we really don't have an excuse. We live in the information age. Everything is at our fingertips. When I was in college and I wanted a journal article, I had to go up to the librarian, and she went up the flight of steps and grabbed me the journal and brought it down. Now you're comfy cozy in your very small dorm room, and you're getting it, I guess, online. So things have definitely changed, but there's a lot of options. And then who's the publisher, right? They call it the man behind the curtain. Who's standing to gain from this information? Most cases we're looking at a website. You generally want to be able to know who came up with it, what's their background. You should be able to find it. If you can't find it, that should be a little red flag. You also want to make sure that the website is being regularly updated. If it hasn't, you don't generally want to get information from a dead page unless it's like referencing an old article. There is some value in referencing old articles. Like, say, for example, you're talking about the concept of groupthink, which is a concurrent seeking behavior in groups where they make bad decisions because there's too much group cohesion. That's okay to reference. I mean, groupthink isn't going to change. It's a small group theory, and it's pretty much the same. Psychology theories are not going to change. Major scientific theories are not going to change. It's all right to reference standard articles. Not everything has to be from 2017, 2018, 2000, whatever. Some things are important articles, traditional articles, for a reason. Okay. So these are the things that the textbook talks about. It talks about the values of libraries, the internet, how to make sure you have accurate notes, avoiding plagiarism, how to go about writing a questionnaire, how do you follow APA and MLA guidelines, personal interviews, which I'm going to have a PowerPoint later in the week or maybe even next week that I post that helps you kind of put together your career report interview if you haven't done that already. All right, so the first thing, if you choose an interview as a way to obtain information, is you want to make sure that you select an appropriate subject expert. So for your career report, I'm hoping that you pick somebody that's doing the career that you want to do, or is at least in the field. You want to prepare the questions ahead of time. Don't be doing this on the spot. That's wasting your time, their time. And take effective notes. If you're like me and your handwriting is chicken scratch, you may want to transfer your notes over to a typed version as soon as you get home, and review and summarize your notes after, things that you forgot to write down. Because obviously you want to have eye contact with the person and be paying attention to them. Don't ask your career report person things that you can find online. You don't want to insult them. Show that you did your research. Okay. If you are in an observation or experiment situation, which many of you are if you're in the science or medical field, generally you want to pick where you're experimenting carefully. You want to keep effective records, and if you're observing, you want to remain as unobtrusive as possible. That whole people act differently when they're being observed situation. For example, my teaching was observed at RMU. I certainly behaved much differently than I would if I was just in my normal teaching environment. And like I said, I'm not going to get into all this. Really, this isn't a research class. It's more of a refresher. Okay, say that you're using questionnaires. You want to design with the least needed effort from respondents, but most information gained. People don't want to do a whole lot of work. If you tell them this questionnaire is going to take 45 minutes, that may be the last statement that they read. So make it easy for them. It's the same thing with the memo assignment. I think I'd indicated provide them all the handouts, provide them all the attachments, make it easy for them to do the memo assignments. The same thing with questionnaires. Make it very easy for them to go through and complete all the necessary questions. Don't make questions harder to understand than they need to be. So very clear, simple, plain language. You don't want to use double negatives or anything like that. And then make sure that the participants actually depict who you're trying to study. If you have a population that's all men, all white, all college students, and then you try to use that data to understand older women that are all nurses, like that's not going to work, right? Because that population is probably not an awful lot like the other population. So thinking about these things. All right, so workplace content. What I mean by this is a lot of times we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to take information that is already out there and use it again. Now, various workplaces have different ideas about this. When I worked with Dr. Nadler at Miami University, she always said, listen, you can take whatever I give you as long as you cite it. If I have an activity and you want to use it in one of your classes, use it. Cite me, but use it. I always felt so supported and like she really wanted to help me develop. And I've worked in other departments where people are very protective of their content because for some, this is authorship. This is their writing and they don't want to share. I have worked in departments where I've asked for people, hey, can I have a copy of your syllabus or can I see a couple example assignments? And they've been radio silence, nothing. So find out what your workplace policy is on this. If somebody has created something, are you allowed to use it? How do they want it cited? Do they want to be referenced? So you're adapting it and you're fitting it for a new content. However, you want to make sure that you're revising it as necessary when you're using it for a different medium. So say, for example, you have Excel information, but you need to take that information and put it into a brochure. Well, a brochure has different qualities and design elements that it needs to have versus an Excel document. And so you've got to think about, okay, how can I make this information, how can I take this content and put it into an attractive brochure? Thinking about these 6 panels for the brochure, thinking about how the first panel has to look. Like when you're thinking about a brochure as a document, there's actual classes you can take on how to create a brochure. Like I used to teach here's how to make brochures. And so you can't just take information, copy and paste it, like every format type, just like the memo or just like the resume or just like, any document, any business document that we create in here. There are rules and some suggestions about how to put that together. So know your department, organization, what have you's feeling about repurposing content and follow those guidelines. The last thing you want to do is offend somebody or worse yet, have them accuse you of trying to steal their material. Okay, libraries are great. We're lucky enough to have subject expert librarians at Pitt, so use them. They're more than happy to help. Utilize all of the catalogs and information that we have, the databases, all of that. If you have any questions, I do have a contact and I can get you in touch with her. Just email me about that. I also have contacts at the the Mount Lebanon Library and the Upper St. Clair Library. I'm there regularly. So if you live in that area, I can get you connected with those people as well. The internet, where we spend most of our time, right? So if you're on the internet, I think that you understand you've got to evaluate. You can't always take everything at face value. Thinking about things in terms of its relevance, timeliness, whether it's accurate, credible, biased. These are all things that I think we're kind of used to by now, and looking at the breadth and depth of information and keeping detailed records. What I mean by this is knowing what's your idea versus knowing what you took from somebody else. So by this point in your college career, I'm hoping that you have a set way that you take research notes. I typically don't type. I'll get out just a piece of paper and a pen. I usually put the source at the top. I take my own notes, and if I'm taking something direct, I will put quote marks around it just to keep myself accountable with the page number so that I can make sure that I'm accurately citing. I don't want, once I'm putting my PowerPoint together, to be guilty of plagiarism. I've had occasions before where students have taken large chunks of copy and by accident, and I really do believe it, by accident, been guilty of plagiarism. So please don't do that. That being said, 70% of master's level theses have instances of plagiarism in it, which is just kind of crazy because we're not talking about high schoolers. We're not talking about college students. We're talking about master's level students, 70%. So apparently, people don't really know how to credit sources appropriately. So you want to make sure that you've got complete citations. The idea is that you provide me enough information so that I can find your source. And you're giving credit where credit is due. As someone who wrote a thesis, it was a heck of a lot of work. And I would be not very happy if somebody pretended that they wrote it. And the sources obviously give you some credibility beyond, this is just what I think. Look, other people say this too. Multiple other people say this too. So generally, if you've got paraphrased information or you've got direct quotes, you want to cite. And in this class, you're always welcome to use MLA or APA, whatever kind of citation format works in your brain. I think we're doing enough just trying to learn sometimes a new format. Many of us are researching new areas, and so I don't want you to have to then try to figure out a new format. So whatever format works for you. My brain works APA. It does not work MLA. All right, so here's some tips. These are things that have helped me, things that I've learned along the way. Librarians, they are very helpful. They really don't mind you asking them. That's what they're there for. Start like yesterday. So much of the writing process is just that, a process. You've got to come up with your topic. Then you've got to research it. Then you got to find out that half of what you researched you can't even use. Or half of what you found isn't even applicable to your topic. Or no, well then you change your topic, so you got to go back. Then you write it. Then you got to edit it. Then you have, it's a very long process. So the earlier the better. Even if it's just on a piece of paper, jotting down a basic outline, you'll feel better. You can say, I started. Take effective notes. You want to be able to know, was that my idea or theirs? Sometimes I've heard people suggest using different colored pens for this is something I'm thinking of, or this is something I found in the textbook or another reference. Think about where you can use the material that you find. Like, oh, that'd be really good in my intro, or oh, I can use that as a supporting point in this main point. Aim for the high road. Yes, you could have all internet sources. Yep, you could totally do that. You could also have a book. You could also have a medical journal. You could also have a personal contact. I think that we often forget the personal communication is an actual form of research. If you have a report that you're doing about, let's say that you want to talk about addiction, and you want to talk about the nature of addiction, and you have a colleague that works in addiction, and you want to call her up and ask her about treatment and what's most successful in terms of treating addiction. I could call Kathy Tagmeyer, who's a real contact of mine, and say, hey, look, I know you've worked with juveniles that have struggled with heroin addiction before. What treatment facilities in Western PA have worked? Well, guess what? I just did research. I just had personal communication with someone that's real in the field, and I would cite that in a paper. Personal communication and the date of the communication. And that's high quality. She's a kind of an expert with that. So don't forget about the whole interviewing as an option. Cite often and accurately. Obviously, you don't want to be citing sources just to cite sources. You don't want to be having materials just to have them. But the best way to write is to be informed. Really, the only way to inform is to research and read. But make sure that you're doing those things appropriately and accurately. So the end result here is that we have a document with main points. It will have examples, statistics, sometimes narratives. People love stories, illustrations, expert opinions. And then, of course, we've got my little humor here. I think we've got enough information, don't you? All we have is one fact that you made up. That's plenty. By the time we add an introduction, a few illustrations, and a conclusion, it will look like a graduate thesis. And then, of course, I have to follow my own advice. So here's my works cited. All right, so that takes us to the end of the research portion. If you have any questions or anything that's kind of lingering, let me know. Hopefully this will help you prepare your career report. I'll have another PowerPoint that focuses more on interviewing because I think we kind of talked about that pretty quickly. But this should help you research the memo, and I think it'll also help you in terms of researching information for your proposal, which we'll be talking about shortly. So I hope your week's going well. Reach out if you need anything.